So based on a weather forecast like this and planning a few days ahead, we succeeded to fly 8 days out of 9. I'm so stoked to start a completely new section of this series. It's all about improvising on the spot. Welcome back to the Paramotor Adventure Stories. This is a complete guide to paramotor pilots to plan and commit to their paramotor adventures. Let's talk about how to improvise based on the actual weather forecast. Story number 1, New Zealand. That was an amazing adventure about 3 weeks ago. It has been my dream for a long time. So our plan was to fly the South Island, cover most of it, and we did a good research, so we had plenty of points of interest pre-selected on the map. We arrived to Christchurch, which is in the center of the South Island. Weather was flyable pretty much anywhere, and we had to choose where to go. Now, what did we do? The first thing you need to do is launch the weather forecast app. For these kind of adventures, the Windy app is the best. You can use it on your phone or a desktop on a large screen. Now, there are a few things you need to focus at. Looking at the weather forecast, obviously the wind is your primary concern. What I've realized, don't use the weather forecast for wind at the surface. It's usually too optimistic and reports blue flyable wind everywhere, but it's rarely so. So on flat areas, on flat lands, I would usually move this slider up to at least 100 meters. But in most cases, for cross-country flying over some mountains, you need to check the map, the terrain, and we mostly were flying around 1,500 meters. And well, the highlight of the trip was the Mount Cook, which was almost 4,000 meters, almost 12,000 feet. So you need to always check the weather forecast for wind speeds at the actual altitude that you're gonna fly at. So I usually lift it at to probably 600 meters. That's my favorite weather forecast, and if I fly over mountains, that I adjust for 1,500 or even 4,000 in case of Mount Cook. Second thing, obviously, you need to check is the rain. So I click the rain. Now, there's a sign for storms, obviously avoid that, but if it's light blue like this, you may check how it develops later during the day, and usually light blue like that, there's still pretty good chance of flyable weather. So I would not totally cancel the plans to go somewhere where it's a little bit bluish, especially if the area of the blue is not too big. There's still a very good chance of flyable weather. So don't let it discourage you. This kind of blue, it's not really a bad thing. It's most probably flyable. Depends on your courage, of course. So the great thing about this windy forecast that you see the whole area at once on a time scale that you move. So what we did in Christchurch when we arrived, we checked the weather and it was flyable, similar to like it is now, on all over the island. But then I moved the slider to like in 2 days or 3 days. Of course, checked not just the wind but also the rain, and we realized that although it's flyable everywhere, it's smarter to move to the north towards Nelson and the Tasman National Park, because in 2 days it was not flyable in the south but still flyable in the north. So for the first 2 days we kind of started to move from Christchurch to the north, and it was a great move because we had great flights over there, and 2 days later, the wind direction changed completely 180 degrees, so we continued to fly along the west coast with amazing tailwind, and somewhere halfway we were stopped by heavy rain. That was unavoidable. It was raining all over the island, so there's nothing we could do about it. So we checked the weather forecast. It was non-flyable for a day and a half, rain all over, heavy rain. They have a lot of rainforest on the west coast. And We used this time to travel probably more than 8 hours all day to travel to the fjordlands in the south, because we realized that the forecasted wind will change direction 180 degrees again. So we used that to drive down, and 2 days later we had tailwind to fly our way back into the central part of the island. And so we had great flights in the south, in the West Fjords, probably my favorite in New Zealand. And then we flew our way closer to Queenstown and Mount Cook. We had amazing flights over Mount Cook, because by that time there was a high pressure park straight on the peak of the Mount Cook. So there was nil wind at 4,000 meters. That's where we had to lift this slider all the way up to 4,000 meters, which usually it may seem like this, but it wasn't that time. We had a nice blue circle straight over Mount Cook, and we had zero wind at 4,000 meters. You could foot drag that mountain. That was amazing. That was truly amazing. So, based on a weather forecast like this, checking the wind speed at the right altitude, checking the rain, not being afraid of the light blue rain, and planning a few days ahead, we succeeded to fly 8 days out of 9, and that one particular day in the middle of the trip was non-flyable all over the New Zealand. I think we maximized our paramotor experience, so use this app to do the same. Story number 2, flying in Iceland. 2 years ago we had very specific weather forecast for Iceland. So this is our map preparation, pre-selection of good spots, flyable spots in Iceland. And actually the most beautiful parts are here in the south and eventually west up to the West Fjords and here in the north. So we started flying here around the Skogafoss, my favorite place, great waterfalls, glaciers, flying over to Thorsmork, lots of canyons, an amazing place. So we flew here for 2 days, and the weather forecast said it will be extremely strong winds here in the south and rain, storms. So we drove 8 hours all the way up to the West Fjords and had 2-3 amazing flights up here. Then the weather was supposed to change again, with bad weather here and good weather down there. So we drove another 9 hours down here. It's not that far, but the roads are really bad up here. So with the trailer and the full van, we had to be slow. So we drove another 9 hours here. Really respect, kudos to the participants of the trip. They were really patient. There was a lot of suffering, being squeezed on the little van, but these guys did the effort to maximize the paramotor adventure, for the paramotor experience, and we succeeded, because when we arrived to the same camp at Skogafoss 3 days later, I asked the receptionist lady, how was the weather? And she said, bad. The wind was picking up the tents and tearing them apart. And, well, it was amazing up in the West Fjords. So, again, check the wind at the right altitude, check the forecasted rain, and adapt your plans. So this is what we do on these trips. We follow the weather. We follow the low wind and follow the nice sunny weather to fly. And in most of the trips, if you're really committed, then you get most of the days flyable. Especially on longer trips. Longer trips give you a little bit more freedom. So what is the success rate you can expect from good weather planning? Obviously, if you plan it right in advance and you come in the statistically best season, you increase your chances. If you do it hard and you follow the weather, you increase your chances. On our trips that we do, we are pretty successful. So even in demanding places like Iceland, that it's kind of known for having high winds and very variable weather, but also other places like Spain and Croatia and so on, we were pretty successful. We succeeded to do 8 to 11 great flights with every group in Iceland. We did 13 flights in New Zealand, 13 flights in 8 days, which is pretty good. It's easier to improvise when the trip is longer. If the trip is longer, then like 9 days, for example, then even if the weather is bad here, you can travel to the other side and spend a day just traveling and fly over there. But if the trip is short, sometimes it's just not possible to follow the weather and drive too far, because you need to be back in 2 days because the trip finishes and you have a plane to catch. So with longer trips, you usually have much better chances and much better success rate to even have 80% of the days flyable. With shorter trips, it could easily happen it's just 50 because you were unlucky and within those 4 and 5 days, 2 of them were rainy. And it's always good, it's always flyable weather somewhere. But that somewhere, if it's too far to go there and back within that short period of time, you're limited and you will not use that good weather somewhere. So my advice, to summarize, check the weather forecast for wind. Check the weather forecast for wind at the correct altitude. Check the weather forecast for rain. But don't be too cautious about light blue rain. It's, in most cases, it's still flyable, or you have good chances. Check the forecast for a few days ahead so you can plan whether you go south or north or east. It's not only about the weather for tonight, it's also about the weather in 3 days, where you're gonna end up and how you're gonna fly, will it be tailwind or not. And if you have the opportunity, plan for a longer trip. With a trip twice as long, you will not have just twice as many flyable days. You'll probably have 3 times as many flyable days. You'll have higher success rate because you can follow the weather with better options. So in the next chapter, we'll kind of stay in the topic with weather forecast and winds and so on, because we will have a great guest, Jean-Francois, a super experienced paramotor adventure pilot, and we will talk about the topic, what altitude shall I fly at? Hit the subscribe button so you don't miss this interesting chapter and this interesting guest, and see you soon. Thanks. Ciao.